Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's good to be back. Just one announcement before we get started, at least that I can think of, and that is a caveat to a previous announcement. So I told you previously that the midterm is going to be on November 5th. So that means that the lecture that would have been on the 5th will be on the 3rd. And that lecture, which I believe is on self-esteem, will not be on the midterm. However, if you've been coming to class, and you're here now, so there's no reason to assume you haven't been, if you've been coming to class, you've probably noticed that the first 10 to 15 minutes of each class is the end of the lecture from the previous class. Okay? The 10 to 15 minutes of the lecture that ends the last lecture that's supposed to come before the midterm will be on the midterm. So that lecture, I believe, is the lecture on losing control, losing self-control. And that lecture will be on the Thursday, a week before the exam, but if history is any guide, I will spend 15 minutes of Tuesday, November 3rd, talking about it. That will be on the midterm, and you should be happy that that's on the midterm, because otherwise it would be on the final, and then you'd have to remember what from that lecture was and wasn't on the final, and that would be a big mess. So that will be on the midterm. Let's see. Probably on Thursday of this week, or maybe Tuesday of next week, we'll start trying to figure out when would be a good time to schedule the review session for. The review sessions are typically scheduled for 5 or 6 p.m., probably either Monday or Tuesday, the week of the exam. Hopefully in here, but that's not guaranteed. It depends on what space they can give us. We do them after 5 p.m. because otherwise the classrooms are usually all full. I do them about 3 to 4 days before the exam, because if I do it before that, nobody has done any studying yet. If I do it the day before the exam, people just come in looking like they want to hurt me. I did that once. I will not do that again. So it'll probably be Monday or Tuesday, but we'll try to take votes on what's better or worse. And I'm guessing we'll be able to get that review session audio podcast, but probably not video cast, because I think it's reasonable to ask them to give me a microphone so I can record the session. I don't think it's reasonable to ask someone from AV to actually come and record that, because there's actually a guy back there in the booth right now who, when I run across the stage like this, he has to follow me. I know, I haven't played with that once. Okay, so when we left off last time, we were talking about introspection and how introspection, is not infallible. Introspective thinking, can get us into trouble and lead us to make decisions that we will later regret. So we were talking about what I was generically calling an introspective error. That's not an official title of anything. It's not like the false consensus effect. That's a known effect. And so when we talked about this, we talked about the fact that when you make your list of reasons for why you would choose one art print over another, in some sense you're now substituting what's on that list for your actual sort of gut responses that you otherwise would have used to guide your response. And so it's a little as if you handed your list to someone else and they were trying to figure out what you liked. We kind of do the same thing when we look at our own list. And so this suggests, as I mentioned on the first day, that introspection does not always reveal sort of private, privileged information. It doesn't take us to the sort of royal road of truth about ourselves. It can be biased and influenced by all sorts of things, like how easy it is to put into words thoughts about these two art prints. And I want to give you one more example from research on how this sort of ease of doing something introspectively can get us into trouble. So this is a study that Norbert Schwartz did, and what he asked people to do was, first, is that he asked them to list 6 or 12 times when they had either been assertive or unassertive. And to be clear, what I mean here is some people were asked to think about times that they had been assertive. Some people were asked to think about times they had been unassertive. Some people were asked to come up with 6 instances. Some people were asked to come up with 12. Okay? So people are either thinking about when they were assertive or thinking about when they were unassertive. Okay? And you might generically think that thinking about times that you've been assertive would then lead you to rate yourself as more assertive overall compared to when you've been thinking about when you were unassertive. So if you've been thinking about all the times that you were assertive in the past, you think, oh, I'm a pretty assertive person. And if you think about the times that you've been unassertive, you might think that less so. Now, if you've been thinking about and coming up with a list of 6 times that you were assertive or unassertive, that's exactly what you get. So if you were thinking of times that you were assertive, and you're only thinking of 6 instances, when you later are asked, how assertive are you, on a scale from 1 to 7, people rate themselves as more assertive if they've been thinking of times that they were assertive. However, if they were asked to think of 12 instances of when they were assertive, or 12 instances of when they were unassertive, the pattern reverses. Okay? So if you've been asked to think of 12 times that you've been assertive, you actually think of yourself as less assertive than if you only had to think of 6 times when you were assertive. Okay? And the same is true sort of in reverse over here. If you've had to think of 12 times when you were unassertive, you actually think of yourself as more assertive than if you had to think of 6 times when you were unassertive. Okay, so this seems, on the face of it, a bit paradoxical. But what is going on here is that it is hard to think of 12 times that we've kind of demonstrated any particular trait, assertive or unassertive. Okay? So as we're trying to come up with these different times when we've been assertive, we get to 6 relatively easily, and we're thinking of ourselves as pretty assertive at that point. But then getting from 6 to 12 is hard. And so what we do is we mistake the difficulty of thinking of times when we were assertive, or the difficulty of thinking of times when we were unassertive, as an indication that that trait is not descriptive of us. So if it's hard for me to come up with 12 times when I was assertive, I think I must not be that assertive. They wouldn't have asked me to come up with 12 unless 12 was something you should be able to come up with. So the moral of this story is that the ease with which you can come up with these instances of being assertive or unassertive can be substituted as an indicator of whether you actually are assertive or unassertive in a trait-like way. Okay? So we mistake the ease with which the examples come to mind for an indicator of just how assertive or unassertive we are. Okay? In both these cases, these folks came up with at least 6 instances of being assertive, but having to think of more led them to think they were less assertive because it was mentally hard to do. All right. We're going to turn to another category of controlled processing, reflective conscious processing. Okay, and this is the category of thinking about others' awareness of us. Okay, this is thinking about other people thinking about us. Okay. One little demonstration of this that I found particularly appealing when I stumbled upon it is this bar I went to in New York City several years ago now called the Remote Lounge. I don't know if the website is up anymore because I think the bar has been closed for at least a few years now. Most bars don't last more than a few years in New York, particularly if they sort of have a novelty component to them like this one did. And what you probably can't tell just from looking at it is that this is essentially a little video camera. Okay? And all over the bar were little video cameras like this. People sat in booths, and there were video cameras right in front of them. And all over the bar, there were video cameras angled in all these different ways. And they all had a motor component so that they could spin in all sorts of different directions. And wherever you were sitting, there was a TV screen in front of you. and you could select through all the video cameras. And once you selected a video camera, you could then use a joystick to control who it was looking at. Okay, so you're sitting there, and there's all these little video cameras moving around, and then it stops on you, which means somebody has just chosen to be staring at you. But you can't tell who it is. But they also had in the panel this thing where you could, like, hit a button, and the phone next to them would ring. And you could call them. And they didn't know who you were, but you knew who they were. And so everybody knew that everybody was watching everybody else at the same time. Okay? And people thought this was cool. I did. Because it's, I think, indicative of what is kind of going on all the time. We're always thinking about other people, thinking about noticing us. While we're thinking about them, they're thinking about somebody else thinking about them, but that person's really thinking about us. There's all these sort of entanglements of social awareness. Okay? In this case, where it sort of became hyperbolic, you get all sorts of people engaging in behavior that they otherwise would not engage in at a public bar like this. For instance, here's lots of people picking their noses. This is actually one of my best friends. He was a keyboardist in a band I played in college. And this is one of my wife's best friends who proceeded to do a strip show for whoever happened to be watching. Oh, right. The other thing is you can press another button to take pictures of whatever was on the screen. And then those pictures get uploaded to the website. So all the pictures that got taken get uploaded to the website. And so everybody thinks they're being so creative and original, responding in this unique way to having this done. But people keep responding in the same ways. And of course, you get a whole lot of this. Okay? I particularly like this guy. So... And I believe that's my wife. Giving all of you the finger. Yes. Okay. So, okay. We know that other people are mentally aware. They have thoughts, feelings, so on. Our ability to know that others are aware, that they have a mind that has contents, beliefs, thoughts, intentions, desires. This is called theory of mind. We have a theory that other people have minds, kind of like our own. Okay? We know that others know that we're aware. And so this thing that kind of comes out of like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, I know that you know that I know, okay, is a powerful social force that affects our behavior and judgments. And we're going to explore that quite a bit over the next couple of weeks. And I think it's one of the reasons why the elevator logic that I tell you about in the last lecture seems to stick for everyone. That is one of the 3 things I have found that if I see you in 5 years on an elevator, you'll say, you're like, that person took the elevator 1 floor. Everyone seems to remember that. Why? I think it has something to do with me sort of revealing how certain people make sense of other people. And I think it's sort of a sticky thing that we usually worry about but don't know what exactly is going on. And in the context of thinking about controlled processing, reflective conscious processing, we know that our sensitivity to others paying attention to us and thinking about us, we know that goes out the window when we're drunk, on drugs, are sleep deprived, distracted. Anything that makes us less able to sort of reflect effectively makes us less sensitive to how others might be looking at and evaluating ourselves. And some would suggest that when we're drunk or whatever else, that we're somehow more free to be ourselves, whatever that means. And we'll come back to what that might mean. So I want to just show you one of my favorite videos that relates to this. I know that you know, and I'm guessing a lot of you have seen this, but I think it's worth viewing momentarily regardless. That's good enough, I think. Oh. Okay. We're not getting sound. I don't know why. right, we're going to go a different way then.
It is down to you, and it is down to me. If you wish her dead, by all means, keep moving forward.
Let me explain.
There's nothing to explain. You're trying to kidnap what I've rightfully stolen.
Perhaps an arrangement can be reached?
There will be no arrangement, and you're killing her.
Well, if there can be no arrangement, then we are at an impasse.
I'm afraid so. I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brains.
You're that smart.
Let me put it this way. Have you ever heard of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates?
Yes?
Morons.
Really? In that case, I challenge you to a battle of wits.
For the princess? To the death? I accept.
Good. Then pour the wine. Inhale this, but do not touch.
I smell nothing.
What you do not smell is called iocane powder. It is odorless, tasteless, dissolves instantly in liquid, and is among the more deadly poisons known to man. Where is the poison? The battle of wits has begun. It ends when you decide and we both drink and find out who is right and who is dead.
But it's so simple. All I have to do is divine from what I know of you. Are you the sort of man who would put the poison into his own goblet or his enemy's? Now, a clever man would put the poison into his own goblet because he would know that only a great fool would reach for what he was given. I'm not a great fool, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. But you must have known I was not a great fool. You would have counted on it, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me.
You've made your decision then?
Not remote, because iocane comes from Australia, as everyone knows. And Australia is entirely peopled with criminals. And criminals are used to having people not trust them, as you are not trusted by me, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you.
Truly, you have a dizzying intellect.
Wait till I get going! Where was I?
Australia.
Yes, Australia. And you must have suspected I would have known the powder's origin, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me.
You're just stalling now.
You'd like to think that, wouldn't you? You've beaten my giant, which means you're exceptionally strong. So you could have put the poison in your own goblet, trusting on your strength to save you, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. But you've also bested my Spaniard, which means you must have studied. And in studying, you must have learned that man is mortal. So you would have put the poison as far from yourself as possible, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me.
You're trying to trick me into giving away something. It won't work.
It has worked. You've given everything away. I know where the poison is.
Then choose.
I will. And I choose... What in the world can that be?
What? Where? I don't see anything.
Oh, well, I could have sworn I saw something. No matter.
What's so funny?
I'll tell you in a minute. First, let's drink. Me from my glass, and you from yours.
You guessed wrong.
You only think I guessed wrong. That's what's so funny. I switched glasses when your back was turned. Ha ha, you fool. You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia. But only slightly less well known is this. Never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line.
Okay. So, I can never get enough of that one. Theory of mind on steroids, right? So that's one of those sort of comical, but reflects what really goes on, which is us trying to figure out what other people are thinking about us and trying to adjust our own behavior, our own thinking to get what we want from that other person. Okay, this is just that in extreme form when death is on the line. Now I want to show you a couple of studies where death is not on the line, but where we can see this kind of phenomenon at work in a way that perhaps has other consequences that we might care about. So the first study I want to tell you about is a study done by Bob Kleck and Strenta. This is about 30 years old now. And in this study that was done at Dartmouth, subjects came in, okay, and they were told that they were going to be helping out the experimenter in an interaction study. Okay? And they were told that they were going to help out by being a confederate in the study, and that the other subject was kind of the real subject, and that we were really interested in understanding that other subject. So half of the subjects who came in first, who were the confederates in the study, okay, were told that we were going to put a fake scar on your forehead. It's going to be pretty prominent and large. Okay? And so they had a makeup artist, a professional makeup artist, who came in and basically put, I think, something that looked a bit like a port wine stain on their forehead. So if you remember like what Mikhail Gorbachev looked like, most of you were saying, who's Mikhail Gorbachev? He used to be in charge of half of the world. We were in charge of the other half. But in any event, he had this big birthmark on his forehead, and it was, unattractive. And so half of the Confederates get this put on their forehead. Okay? And so they get it put on, and they're shown it in a mirror so they know exactly what it looks like and where it is on their forehead, so they know where the other person sort of might be looking at them when they have the interaction. And then the makeup artist sort of puts some sealant on it to make sure that it'll stay and not be affected by them sweating or anything like that. And the subjects are told that they're going to go in and have an interaction with this other person who doesn't know anything about anything. And what the experimenters are interested in is essentially how sort of anxious and tense that person is based on whether or not the Confederate has this scar on their forehead. Okay? So half the subjects are going in with a scar on their forehead, half the Confederates, that is. Half the Confederates go in without the scar on their forehead. And they're told, as they have the interaction, to sort of observe their partner, and they're going to make ratings about their partner when they come out. And other people are going to make ratings too, but they're going to make ratings about how their partner behaved during the interaction. Okay? And so the results are not terribly surprising. So the Confederate with the scar on their forehead, if they have the scar on their forehead, they rate their partner as being much more tense than if they don't have the scar on their forehead. And they also rate their partner as being much more patronizing than if they don't have the scar on their forehead. Okay? And none of this is terribly surprising. You'd expect certainly this one to be the case. That would make lots of people uncomfortable if they're meeting you for the first time. The thing that made this study distinctive and really important is that the scar was imaginary. Okay? And what I mean by that is the Confederates who went in with the scar on their forehead, they were the real subjects in the study, and the sealant that the makeup artist put on at the very end to make sure that they wouldn't sort of sweat through and have the makeup running, they actually, after they showed the subject what the scar looked like on their forehead, they removed it. Okay? So by the time they walked into the room to have the interaction, all subjects had nothing on their foreheads. Okay? But half of the subjects believed that they did. Half of the subjects believed that they had this scar on their forehead and that it was patently obvious to the other person. And as a result of that, they had dramatically different experiences of how their partner was treating them. These folks who have nothing on their forehead thought their partners were incredibly tense. Okay? And the other folks did not. Okay? So all they took with them into that room was their belief that they had this on their forehead, and how that then played into what they thought the other person was thinking about them. Okay? So there's at least two reasons why you would get this effect here, even when there was no scar involved. Does anyone have a guess as to why you would see this difference even when there's no actual scar there? Thoughts? And so if they're acting differently themselves, what effect would that have? Right. So if I believe that you're looking at me in a certain evaluative way, that's going to make me tense, the confederate in the study. Well, if I'm tense in the study, that's probably going to make you tense for real. Right? Because you're meeting someone for the first time, and they're acting all stressed out and nervous because they think they have this scar on their forehead. So that makes the other subject tense. And so part of this effect is probably due to the fact that, yes, the partner really was more tense, but not because of the scar on the forehead, but because the subjects themselves were acting in an unusual way because they felt uncomfortable. Okay? Why else might this have happened? Yeah. Right, so they might be interpreting the behaviors differently. So if you go into this interaction expecting that the other person is going to be uncomfortable and really focused on your forehead or trying really hard not to focus on your forehead, okay, you might interpret the generally ambiguous signs you get from someone you're meeting in a strange situation for the first time as being more tense than you otherwise would. Okay? So you're sitting down with someone, you two don't know each other. Lots of people are going to be a little bit anxious, okay? But it turns out that we interpret our partner's anxiety very differently depending on what we think might be at the root of it. If we have this explanation, that is our forehead having a big giant mark on it, then we sort of overinterpret the significance of that other person's sort of ambiguous anxiety. Okay?
I'm a little confused about the graph.
Okay.
The ratings were from the opposite person?
So these ratings are made by the person who believes that they have the scar on their head, or the people who thought they were Confederates but didn't have the scar on their head. So in both cases, it's the person who's been told they're a Confederate in the study. And they're making ratings of the other person who doesn't know anything about the study. So somebody gets there early, and they're told, you're a Confederate in our study. And they're either told, you're going to be wearing a scar, or you're in the control condition, where you won't have a scar, even though there's other people who do. Whichever condition you're in, you now go into the interaction with someone who knows nothing about the study whatsoever. You sit down with them, and at the end of the study, you, who think you're a Confederate, either with or without a scar, make ratings of the other person. All right, watch the video. You can hit rewind lots of times. And then come to my office hours if that's not clear. Okay, so there's sort of two different effects here. Okay, the one is what we might call assimilation effects. And this is like when I showed you the demonstration where we had A, B, C, 12, 13, 14, and we understood the B and the 13 differently depending on the context. And here, as was suggested, we might be sort of assimilating the anxious response that we see in the other person to our expectation that they're going to be anxious about our forehead. But also, our own anxiety about being the person with the mark on our forehead, that probably leaks out in our nonverbal behavior and makes the other person uncomfortable. And this creates what social psychologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we'll have an entire lecture on that towards the end of the quarter. Okay, so I want to give you another example of this. This is called the spotlight effect, but I like to think of it as the bad hair day effect. In this study, Tom Gilovich, who's the guy who did the 60s and 80s music study we talked about a couple of lectures ago, he brought people in, and when they got there, they were told that they were late for the study by a few minutes, and that everybody else in the study, the other, I think, 19 people, because they were told they were going to be part of a group study, the other 19 people are in this room already, having a discussion. And so you're going to go in there and have a discussion with them, But before you do, okay, we want you to put on this shirt. We want you to go in there wearing this shirt. And the shirt that they are asked to go in there with has a big picture of Barry Manilow's face on it. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, the reason people are giggling is that nobody who's 20 wants to walk into a room with a big picture of Barry Manilow on their shirt, unless they're like, I'm such a slacker, I can wear that and it's somehow cool because it's ironic. But in this case, this is Cornell. Nobody's cool and ironic there. They just didn't want to wear the shirt. So they go in, they sit down in the conversation that's already sort of ongoing. They sit down, they're there for, 5-10 minutes having this whatever conversation, whatever it's about, I don't really know. And then after this time, the experimenter comes in and points to the subject who's wearing the Barry Manilow shirt and says, "Can you come with me?" So the person with the Barry Manilow shirt gets up, leaves the circle, goes outside the room, and then the person wearing the Barry Manilow shirt is asked, "What percentage of people in that room do you think noticed you were wearing a Barry Manilow shirt?" Okay. And while he's out of the room, the rest of the room, the other 19 people in the room, are asked who was on the shirt of the person who just left the room. Okay. And I think they're actually given multiple choice options. Okay. So I forget what options they were specifically given, but it was something like Barry Manilow, Kurt Cobain, and some other people. I don't remember who. And so what they looked at is the percentage of people that the person wearing the shirt thought would notice compared to the percentage of people in that room who actually did notice. And you get this striking difference. Okay? People thought almost 3/4 of the people in the room noticed that they were wearing this embarrassing Barry Manilow shirt, but in fact you only get about 10% of the people in the room who actually noticed. Okay? So people think and assume that if they walk in wearing a funny shirt or having a bad hair day or something like that, that everybody else is going to be paying attention to them and noticing that distinctive feature of them. Okay? But in reality, people don't notice us nearly as much as we think they will. Okay? The reason why people don't notice us nearly as much as we think they will is because they're busy assuming and thinking about the fact that everybody else is noticing them. Okay? Everybody is busy thinking about other people thinking about them, and as a result, they're not thinking about the other people. That's what seems to happen. And the moral of this story is, don't worry about your bad hair day. 10% of people are going to notice. 90% of people won't. Don't worry about a lot of the things that we worry about being sort of seen doing, because usually they aren't quite as noticeable as we tend to think they will. That said, if you go somewhere in public and start doing something crazy, okay, don't come back and blame me and tell me that I told you to do it. I'm just saying, less people are going to notice than you probably think, okay? But if you go to Disneyland naked, everyone will notice. Okay, so there are limits to this phenomenon. All right. Another controlled processing phenomenon of interest is what's called ego depletion, which is a lousy name for this phenomenon, and so more and more people have been calling it resource depletion. And this has to do with when you have to, at two different points in time, one immediately following the other, engage in different acts of self-control. And it turns out that engaging in two acts of self-control, one after the other, makes the second act of self-control harder to engage in. Okay? Even if the two acts of self-control have nothing to do with each other, they're not similar, it's like there's a mental muscle that actually gets tired out. So just to give you one example of how this works, in one of the first studies that was run in this area, they showed people a video that was either really funny or really sad, and they told people, I think this is from like The Champ or I forget, there's like a series of movies that get used to make people cry in studies. Steel Magnolias, Terms of Endearment, Terms of Endearment I think is actually this one specifically. But you're shown these videos, and you are told, half of the subjects are told, don't show any emotion on your face while you're watching this. So we're going to videotape you watching this video. And we want to make sure that you don't show any emotion on your face. And people are actually quite good at this. So if you tell them not to show any emotion, they don't show any emotion, or almost no emotion at all. Okay? And then the other half of subjects are told to just watch the video without this self-control or suppression instruction. And then after they do that, okay, they're given anagrams to solve. Like, you'd see these letters, and you'd have to figure out that's the word bicycle, with the letters scrambled. Okay? And what they look at is how the condition you're in up here affects how well you do on the anagrams. Now remember, while you're doing the anagrams, you are not under cognitive load. You're not rehearsing a 9-digit number or anything like that. The only thing you're doing at the time that you do the anagrams is the anagrams. But we do worse on the anagrams if just before that we were trying to control our emotional expression and not reveal it. Okay? And this has been shown in about 30 studies now. So this is a very reliable, robust effect. And you can run it the other way. If you have people doing anagrams, they then do worse at suppressing their emotions. These things seem to have nothing to do with each other. Okay? But it turns out that if you look at all the different domains of self-control, almost all of them seem to rely on this same region of the brain, which I will not ask you about on an exam. But this is one of the things we study in my lab. This region of the brain called right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, and almost any kind of intentional self-control you engage in uses this region. And so if you use it for two things that experientially seem completely different, but you're using the same muscle in the brain, it stands to reason that essentially tiring this region out in the service of one of those tasks is going to leave it less able to perform in the other task. And this region is involved in everything from motor self-control to not thinking of a white bear, which hopefully means something to some of you at this point. By the way, I'll get to this, never mind. Emotion regulation, social cognitive, self-control, financial self-control, all these different domains all seem to center on this region of the brain. So I just want to mention and address some questions on automaticity and control together. Okay, we've talked about those for the last two lectures. Automaticity, now controlled processing. One of the questions that you might have after seeing all those John Barge studies where priming people gets people to do things unconsciously is whether or not we're zombies. Okay? Or more specifically, can everything that seems like it's a consciously controlled process be automatically turned on? And do we actually then have or not have what we might think of as free will? Okay, so I'm just going to focus on this one down here for a moment. And when it comes to free will, there's sort of some interesting things to say about it. Of course, we wonder, does it exist? Dan Wegner, who's the author of White Bears, who looks strikingly like a white bear in my opinion, okay, has done a lot of work on what he refers to of illusions of will. Okay? And what he does in these studies is essentially tricks people into believing and endorsing that they caused something to move when they had no control over it whatsoever. Okay? And I'm not going to go through the whole study that's involved in this because it takes a while and we're more behind than I would like to be. And so what you really just need to understand is that just because we can sometimes be tricked into thinking we were responsible for something that we didn't do doesn't mean there's no free will. It just means sometimes our introspections about whether or not we freely willed something can be mistaken. The other interesting thought about this is that the philosopher Dan Dennett once said, I don't think we have free will, but what we do have is free won't. Okay? And I thought this was a very clever sort of verbal construction because what he's suggesting is that most of what we do is usually sort of a series of kind of impulsive, pre-reflective responses, and those sort of go on automatic pilot unless our reflective, conscious processes say, stop. Okay? And so what our conscious reflective processes seem mostly suited for is preventing us from acting on our impulses. And so if you think about it from that perspective, it makes sense to say that we sort of have automatic will, but free won't. We can say no at least some of the time to our impulses. Okay, now, you're going to love these next slides. If you want to know about that study, go listen to the podcast from last year. I talk about it for 10 minutes. But not today, not that study either. No, not that. Okay, so we're going to talk for about a minute about this, and then we're going to move on to the next lecture. So what now, after talking about these two things separately, is the relationship of automatic to controlled processing? What I want to just illustrate for you very quickly is that all the different combinations are possible and occur frequently in everyday life. And what I mean by that is automatic and controlled processes frequently work together. For instance, when you're learning to type, okay, you're consciously, reflectively selecting the keys in the service of developing an automatic habit. Okay? And once you become an expert at typing, you're thinking reflectively about what it is you want to type, and then that gets automatically translated into finger movements. Okay? So there's lots of times where our automatic and controlled processes work synergistically together to kind of get the most out of us, using the controlled processes for what they need to handle, and then letting the automatic processes do the rest. When you're driving a car, this is involved. You do use controlled processing when you're driving, but a lot of driving, once you've been doing it for a few years, is pretty automatic. So the two often work together, but I think the way we typically think about them is when, for instance, controlled processes, as in the free won't case, are overriding the automatic processes. So if you go to England where they drive on the left side of the road, okay, you are going to be consciously overriding your impulses to stay on the right side of the road, to look left, then right, then left, which is the wrong thing to do there. Okay, to not go right on a red light, because going right onto a red light will get you killed. When you turn right in England, you don't want to turn right into the close lane. You need to turn right into the far lane, because otherwise you're going into oncoming traffic. Okay? So we use our controlled processes here, or when we're regulating our emotions. I'll tell you what marshmallow means in a couple weeks if you don't already know. So don't worry about that. No marshmallows needed to be understood for this lecture. But you can eat as many as you want. And then it sometimes goes the other way, where our automatic processes override our controlled processes. Okay? So when we have a lot of adrenaline going through us, when we're playing sports, or we're running for our lives from a bear, okay, this changes the neurochemistry of the brain such that our controlled processes get shut down and become less efficient, or what Amy Arnsten has described as the prefrontal cortex becoming frazzled. And then the automatic processes essentially are kind of running amok and taking over, and that's a good thing. Because when you're running from a bear, you don't want your prefrontal cortex involved in thinking about things like, you know, I'm a philosopher, so I wonder if that really is a bear. Maybe it's not a bear, right? Or, you know, maybe that's a talking bear. So maybe I could just turn around and reason with the bear. I should think about my options, right? You want to turn off that stupid voice and run. Okay? And that's what our neurochemistry does for us. So there's all these different combinations of what can happen, and they all occur. So even though we tend to think of these two things in terms of controlled processes overriding automatic, that's by no means the only relationship that's present. Okay, so now we are moving on to what is the self. So we're going to start with a little demonstration. Everyone needs a place on a piece of paper to write down some answers. You don't have to rip it out. Just leave the paper where it is. But you need to be able to number 1 to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down the left-hand column. And what I would like everyone to do over the next minute or two is I want you to answer the question, who am I? Okay. You're going to answer it 6 times, and every time you answer it, I don't know why this is all off right here. This should be over. Every time you answer it, your answer has to start with the word I. So the first thing on each of your 6 lines should be I, capital I, space, something. So go ahead and write down 6 answers to who am I? Okay, how many people have at least 5 now? How many people have 4? At least 4. 4 or more. Everyone who had 5 should have their hands up. How many have at least 4? Okay, you can stop. Okay, so what I'd now like to ask for are some brave volunteers to read their list to the class. Okay, so who's willing to read their list to the class? And you might have to stand up and say it loud because it's a big room. Yeah, there's a lot of people back there. She didn't know that before she raised her hand.
I am a student. I am a teacher. I am a wife. I am a daughter. I do what I want, and I work hard to achieve my goals.
Great. Excellent. Someone else. Yeah, in the corner. You can come up on stage. I had a feeling he would take me up on the offer. What was the last one? I'm pregnant? Yeah. Okay, someone else. As long as you can be loud, you don't have to stand up.
Smart, charming, fun-loving, strong, feminine.
Okay.
I am Christian. I'm a woman. I'm an African American. I'm a student. I love sushi, and I'm friendly.
Okay, excellent. What about some people from the back half of the room? Yeah.
I'm a curious person. I like the idea of exploring the world. I love studying UCLA, and sometimes I'm lost in my ideas.
Good. Further back. Further back. Maybe just over a little to the right there. Sure. Yep. Yeah.
I am married. I am a student. I am ambitious. I am an inspiring psychologist. I am happy. I am a hero.
Okay. Excellent. Yes. Okay. Some others? Maybe back in that quadrant? Yeah? Adventures. Okay. Excellent.
Okay. I am a student at UCLA. I am a wife and mother. I am fun-loving, smart and loving. I am a free-speaking life source. I am a nurturer. I am me.
Okay. I am me. Okay. I think I saw that movie. No, that was Sam I Am. No. Okay. So, one last one. All right, good. Some good answers there. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And now, maybe a round of applause for everyone. So now, okay, so there were definitely some variations across the answers that people gave, to be sure. But what are some of the common things that people reference in their answers? You don't have to be one of the people who answered to raise your hand now. So a lot of people mentioned Right, whether they were students. So let's just take a show of hands. How many people have some indication about being a student or a UCLA student or a psychology? Oh, so many of you. How many of you said something about whether or not, something about your family in terms of your siblings or your parents or something like that? Okay, how many of you said something about your gender, male, female? Okay, how many of you said something about your ethnicity? Okay, so far you're all the same person. Okay. All right. What else can we say about those kinds of facts that people reveal about themselves when they're asked, who am I? Okay. Is there something else that all those facts have in common? Just a couple things. Yeah. They're all categories. Okay. Yeah. What'd you say? Group membership, right? So our group memberships are a really important part of how we define ourselves. Okay. Here's a couple other things about those things. Okay. They're all static. Most of them haven't changed since the day you were born, except for maybe I'm a UCLA student now. But if your parents had anything to do with it, right, they may have already known you would be a UCLA student at some point. And even the things like wife and mother are things that, looking at almost any baby, knowing their gender, we could know that they would become that someday and remain that for the rest of their lives. Okay? So we're picking very long, enduring categories as ways of saying who we are. These things are enduring, they don't change very frequently, and many of them were already determined the moment you were born. Okay? So how many of you really think you are today the same person you were the moment you were born? Okay, I can tell you my 2.5-year-old is almost nothing like he was the day he was born. The shape of his head is completely different than the day he was born. Okay, he has hair now, sort of. Okay, so we think of ourselves in terms of those terms, and yet they're descriptions of us that came a long, long time ago. The other thing about these descriptions that we tend to give is that most of those things that we say about ourselves are things that other people could know about us if they just followed us around for a few days. So somebody who decided to stalk you, or some private eye who got hired by someone else to follow you around, they could learn these things about you without ever meeting you, but just by watching you from a relatively close distance. I think it's awfully interesting that so many of the things that we use to define ourselves are things that don't come from our internal understanding of ourselves at all, but are patently observable to anyone from the same society who can recognize the groupings that we belong to. So, okay, we use the same categories to make sense of ourselves. Okay. We use relatively static categories and relatively observable categories. What was missing from most people's descriptions? Complicatedness. Right, that's a really good one that I don't have on my list of typical things. Right, we are all ridiculously more complicated than we can put into words in a few statements. Yep. Our names. How many of you put your name down? Yeah, you get a lot of names, but only a few people who picked actually said that. But names tend to be a pretty common... And for the people who put their names, how many of that was the very first thing you put down? Yeah, it's usually the first one when people do it. Right. So people tend to focus on positive things about themselves, which makes sense because you're all perfect people, so why would you talk about anything negative about yourself? What? Right. The bad people go to USC, and the good people come to UCLA. We'll get to that in a few weeks. Slightly different terms, but yes, we'll come back to that. In-group, out-group. It's important. Another thing, though, is almost no one talked about their immediate experience right now. Right? How many people, and there'll be a few, but how many people wrote down something like, I'm hungry? Okay, small number, 10. How many people wrote down, I'm writing about who I am? 1, 2. Okay. How many people wrote down, I'm bored? 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't have an ego about this stuff. That's cool. Right, so there are these things that we are immediately experiencing in the moment. They are what consume the moment that we are in, and we don't think that those things are in any way a definition of who we are. And some would argue that they are the only thing we can be sure we are. Because everything else is just something that we have a memory of happening in the past, but it's hard to be very sure of in the immediate moment. It's sort of something that we logically know, but in the moment, if you're feeling hungry, that hunger fills your experience. And some would argue that is who you are in that moment. And to sort of give an example of this, imagine, for those of you who aren't single, but if you're single, you can imagine yourself. If you're not, imagine when you were, and imagine that you have this intense crush on someone else. Okay? You are consumed with that every moment, right, that you're awake. That is what defines you right now. But people don't write that down. People don't write down the experiential things that actually are who we are at this moment. We tend to think that the categories that are enduring are the ways we should describe ourselves. So I don't mean to suggest that you don't know what you're experiencing right now. I'm sure most of you do know what you're experiencing. Although I did notice one or two people sleeping somewhere in the back there, so they might not know what they're experiencing right now. Feel free to paint on their faces. You have my permission. But there's this way in which we think there are rules to answering the question of, who am I? There's another thing that's usually left out, and I don't think I heard this once. Okay? Aspirations for the future. We as a species are so defined by what we hope will happen tonight, tomorrow, a week from now, 10 years from now. Okay? You're sitting here and paying attention in class right now, for many of you, is part of a grand plan to eventually go to medical school, be a doctor, be able to support your family. Right? Humans are the only species that we know of that are defined in this way by what they imagine for themselves in the future. And so much of what we do in the current moment is defined by that future. Everything else in the physical world, right, its position in the world is defined by what has happened to it in the past only. If you imagine a pool table, if you want to know why a ball is sort of traveling the way it is, you have to roll back in time and look at when the pool cue hit the ball or another ball hit it. A ball doesn't go the way it goes because it's hoping to find the ball at the other end of where it's headed. Okay? But humans do work that way. And our hopes for the future, our fears for the future, profoundly define who we are in this moment, but no one ever writes about that in their answers. You did? Awesome. No, not you. Sorry, someone else who was awesome. No. He's pointing to the woman next to him? Or yourself? I can't tell because you're doing this. He's pointing to himself. Okay, good. Excellent. Yeah, in the back. I guess, but starting with the word I mean, how do I describe my aspirations without using that? My tendency is to say, I hope to become a doctor. I want to go do something later tonight. Right? So those sentences very frequently start with the letter I. Now, to your point, it's an important thing to know that in general, anytime anyone is doing a survey, the exact wording can have profound effects on the results you'll get. So in general, I completely agree with what you're saying. But I'd be surprised if that's what drives people here. I think this has more to do with the fact that our understanding of ourselves is more in terms of broad, enduring categories that we slot ourselves into. And yet we think of ourselves in some general way as the most unique thing. That, it's what makes me different from everybody else is myself. And yet when we describe ourselves, we don't seem all that distinct in this way. Now, I want to take that same kind of list, not your exact list, but our general thoughts about who am I, and I want to run the demo kind of in a different way. This time, the game we're going to play is, what could we take away and you would still be you? Okay, let's see if this works the way it should. Okay, what can we take away and you would still be you? So what if we took away your name and changed it? Okay, so each time I bring up one of these, we're going to take a vote. So if you got a new name, would you still be you? Raise your hand if you think you would still be you if you got a new name. How many people think you would not be you if you got a new name? Okay, so somebody who raised their hand to say that they think they would be different if they got a new name, somebody tell me why. What? If you change your name to James Bond? I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear that. Yes, that's what you said? Okay, that would change you, I guess. That was not the answer I was looking for, though. I'm really hoping I just didn't hear that correctly. Yeah.
Well, I have a pretty unique name, so I would imagine if my name was replaced with something more common, then maybe I wouldn't be as relevant.
So you would be less memorable to people, and then that would affect you in somehow because you'd be less memorable to people. Okay? Anyone else? No, you're just putting on your jacket. Okay. So I'm inclined to think, and there's no right or wrong answers to these, but I'm inclined to think that if you change someone's name, they often will change. Did any of you have a name that you can sort of say different ways, and you changed it between high school and college? Like Kate, Catherine, something like that, right? People do that all the time. I'm leaving high school where everyone always called me Kathy. Not me, okay? But I had a friend from high school who was Kathy. I went to, from kindergarten to 12th grade with her, and then I saw her 15 years later, and, now it was Catherine. Okay, and she had changed it when she went to college. Why? Because she wanted people to think about her differently. She thought Catherine was a more serious name, and she wanted to be seen that way. And in having other people see her that way, she saw herself differently. Okay, what about when you change your name, if you do, when you get married? Okay, how many women in here think that when they get married, if they're not already, they will change their name to their husband's name? Okay, raise your hand if you don't think you'll change your name. Okay, so I'm not going to take answers here, but think about why you wouldn't want to change your name. Because clearly, if you wouldn't want to change your name, there's some significance to that. And incidentally, my wife didn't change her name. I think that's an eminently reasonable thing to do if you want to. But that means there's some significance, some attachment to that name. It's part of our identity. And maybe we wouldn't be quite the same person if we changed it. Okay, let's go on. Yeah. Okay. Right, so you don't like your last name. But what does it mean to not like your last name? It's something related to the fact that it's your last name. Like, I don't feel the need to change the word in the English dictionary. I just need to change it because it's attached to me. And I don't like having it attached to me. That suggests that it's playing some psychological role in me. And unfortunately, my wife was screwed because her last name was Eisenberger, my last name was Lieberman. There was no switching to a better last name. Either way, we're both screwed. We talked about just naming our kid Smith. But it didn't happen. Yeah. What about nicknames? That's great. Okay.
Well, I was just when you have a nickname, you're replacing your name.
Yep.
That doesn't necessarily mean that you're changing who you are.
Well, right, but I don't know that it doesn't. See, if you have a nickname associated with a certain group of people that you interact with, and we'll come back to this in a couple of lectures, you're going to be different with those people. And having a different name with different groups that you deal with, in some sense, gives you license to behave in different ways. Okay? We sort of carve out our identities in different ways in different contexts. And our name that we use with different groups might do that. If all of you keep calling me professor or doctor, that might actually restrict the way my identity works in that context differently than if you just called me Matt or, or whatever else I might have been, called throughout my life. So, yeah, okay. Again, the idea here is not to say one of these is right or wrong. The idea here really, and this is going to be for the rest of today and then for the next lecture, is to try to get you to appreciate that thinking about the self isn't as straightforward as we tend to assume it is. So, strangely, in this lecture, my goal is not to teach you new facts, but rather largely to confuse you. Okay? My goal is to get you to not think it's as simple as you probably currently do. That's my goal here. Of course, you're going to need to know some facts for the exam, but along the way, my hope is to get you to be less sure you know exactly what it means when someone uses the word self. Okay, so let's imagine you have a cold, you have a flu. Okay? How many of you think you become a different person when you're sick? Okay? Okay? God help you all that I don't become sick while I'm lecturing this quarter, because I'll be doing cartwheels, not very well, across the stage. Okay? I become a completely different person when I'm sick. I can't think clearly at all. My reactions to everything are different. Everything tastes different. Okay? You're grumpy and kind of a little high. It's just kind of a crazy, cloudy thing. And for me, and everyone has their own feelings about this, I think that I become a different person. Okay? Now, someone on the other side could say, yeah, but I'm still the same person. I mean, you know, same arms, same feet, same head. Okay? Fingerprints match, so you're the same person. The FBI would say, nope, we took your fingerprints before and after you got the cold, you're the same person. Okay? Reasonable people can disagree about this, but I think it's interesting that anyone could even say just getting sick, while all those other things remain constant, could be experienced as becoming a different person. What about if you go on antidepressants, SSRIs, anti-anxiety medication? Okay? Everyone in this room has either been on, is on, will be on, or is close friends or related to people, right, who are on these. These are a massive part of our society. There's more money spent on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication than I think any other drug in the United States. Okay? Which has all sorts of other commentary associated with it about why we need it so much. But clearly, we're doing this. And so we can ask, well, are we changing who we are? Are we changing our identity, ourselves? Okay, how many people think they're a different person or suspect that they'd be a different person if they were on these things? How many people think they're the same person? How many people have no arms? Him. Awesome. Okay. Right, it's hard to say. I still remember all the same things from my life if I'm on antidepressants, and yet everything new that I experience in a different way than I would have if I wasn't on antidepressants. Okay, I experience them differently, and reasonable people can disagree about whether or not I'm the same person with a slight change in kind of my emotional filter for the world, or whether my emotional filter for the world is a fundamental part of who I am, and therefore, if that filter changes, I have changed. Okay? I know lots of people who have gone off of antidepressants because they didn't like how it changed them. And I'm not just talking about sort of minor side effects, but that they didn't like the way it changed their experience of the world such that they didn't feel like themselves anymore. Okay? You can go on this medication that makes you not feel like yourself. And even though it might make you feel happier or less anxious or depressed, we can say, feeling like myself might be more important to me than feeling better. In what? Mm-hmm. Right, no, I think that's absolutely right. So we have these theories that we apply of what constitutes change in another person. And some people look at other people and say, I don't care what they've gone through, they're the same person. And some people look at that same individual and say, no, it's a different person now. They have changed because of the experiences that they've had. And we don't all agree about these things. And even though we probably all think there are some things that change a person, we don't agree on which ones count as changing a person. And it has real consequences for how we view someone leaving prison. Right? That's a very real case of how does society view that person. Are they rehabilitated, which means they're now a different person in some sense, or are they the same person? Okay? And I'm not going to sort of weigh in politically on that particular case, but I think it raises the more general issue that there are consequences to how we view ourselves and other people as being stable or not stable over time. If you view yourself as stable, it may make it harder to engage in certain kinds of change. Okay? So if you view yourself as stable, and it turns out that you're an alcoholic, okay, you might have a lot more difficulty being open to the idea that there are things you can do to fundamentally change the way you experience the world. All right. Couple more of these. We change all your attitudes and preferences. So you used to like peanut butter and jelly, now you hate it. Okay? Oh, I know, that stinks. Okay? You used to hate the show Dexter, now it's your favorite show in the world. All of a sudden, we've just changed all your preferences, just like that. If we change all your preferences, are you the same person? How many people think they're the same person if their preferences change? Okay? Right, not very many. So this is one where there tends to be a lot of agreement that if you change your attitudes and preferences, that means you're a different person. And what that tells us, in part, is that we define other people and ourselves largely, not exclusively, but largely in terms of their attitudes and preferences. When we say we know someone else, we think it means something about being able to predict how they will react to new things that they encounter. And if I really know someone, I know, well, this person never likes any kind of fish, so if I take them to, a seafood restaurant, they're going to be unhappy. And suddenly, if that changed radically, okay, I would feel like, who are you? And how did you become that person? What if we drop you on a deserted island, do nothing to you whatsoever, but there's no one on the island that you know? Okay, would you become a different person? Raise your hand if you'd be a different person. Okay, you've been listening. Good. Social psychology would say, okay, that the environment that you're in is a major factor from day to day in who you are. And if you're not around the people that currently help you define yourselves, even in ways that you're not aware of, I should say mostly in ways that you're not aware of, if you're not around those people, okay, the argument generally is that you in many ways would become a different person. If we plopped you down in some other culture, we dropped you there, you had no more contact with people here, you would change. Your cultural values would change, and there's lots of research to support this. Okay? And in many ways, you would probably become a different person. What about, this is the biggie, this is the last one I think we'll probably do today, what if you got amnesia? And by amnesia, what I specifically mean is you would forget your past, okay, and you would not be able to form new memories. You would forget everything that happened to you in the past. You'd forget your sweet 16. You'd forget your first kiss. You'd forget all that stuff. Okay? Are you still the same person? How many people think you'd still be the same person if you had amnesia? How many people think you wouldn't be the same person? Okay, so the evidence suggests you're all wrong. Okay? So it turns out that if you keep people in the same environment, okay, they pretty much stay the same person, and shockingly, they seem to have pretty good awareness of the person that they are, as good as anyone else. So there's actually some research that's been done with amnesics that suggests that if you ask them, how generous are you, how friendly are you, all these things, and they do these in case studies where someone has temporary amnesia, so they can't remember anything that happened in the past, but we also know that because of the brain injury they had in a year, they probably will be able to remember. When they forget, they still seem to know themselves in much the same way. Here's the one exception. Here's the one thing that seems to really change with amnesia. Okay? You'll tend to like the same things, peanut butter and jelly and Dexter and your, old friends, except those old friends that you have that are kind of legacy friends, like you went to 4th grade with them, you were best friends, and now you might not actually like them so much, but you've been friends for so long, how could you not be friends? Okay, well, that whole stuff goes out the window when you get amnesia, and now you just won't like them. Right? Because you won't have any of those memories that made you feel like you're obligated to stay friends with that person. But other than that, in many ways, amnesics retain their identity and their awareness of their identity. And so this is, again, I think, a very surprising result. Okay, we will resume on Thursday, and office hours tomorrow, 12:30 to 2:30. Right. I believe that what the TAs and I figured out is that everyone who has a Thursday or Friday section should just go to an earlier section. Yeah. But we'll come back to this. Yeah. Wait. Say that again? Right.